Hello, you're watching the Daily Report. It's Friday, November 19th here in Korea. Exit strategies from the pandemic have workers returning to their offices, but the response has not been all positive. We'll tell you why in a bit. Here first is the broader pandemic update with our Kwon So-ah. So let's start on the local front then.
Sure, Sunny. We're wrapping up the work week with more than 3,000 COVID-19 infections again. Let's take a closer look at the figure. 3,034 infections were tallied in the span of 24 hours as of 12 a.m. And that includes more than 3,000 domestic transmissions. Now, for the third straight day, cases have been in the 3,000s. It's a slight decline compared to yesterday, but compared to last week on Friday, it's more 666 more cases than last Friday. And if we move over to our map, the capital Seoul now for the third straight day, so more than 1,400 infections. A slight decline in some parts, but also a slight uprise in other parts. We're seeing, however, a single-digit figure in Ulsan as well as Sejong City. Now, with that, Korea has a total of 409,099 COVID-19 infections, and 28 additional fatalities have raised the death toll to 3,215. Now, the number of patients that are currently in critical or severe condition has dropped a little to 499, but still this is close to 500, which means there is some strain to the medical capacity. Now, let's move over to the vaccination figures. 42.1 million people have received at least one COVID-19 shot, and 40.3 million, close to 40.4 million, are fully vaccinated. Going over to figures abroad, we're seeing a similar rise in infections compared to the day before, with close to 629,000 new infections, with 8,300 fatalities reported in the same span. And resurgences are continuing in many European countries, including here in the UK, Russia, Germany, which has also seen another record high, the total now at 5.2 million. France has reported more than 20,000 infections in the past day, and also Italy over 10,000 cases in just a day. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for those numbers. Now let's get a better picture of the situation here on the local front with our Kim Yeon-seung. Yeon-seung, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Sunny.
Right, so the Greater Seoul area is now feeling the strain of surging caseloads. Tell us more.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sunny. So the beds in the Greater Seoul area are filling up very quickly. As of now, ICU beds in the Seoul capital region are more than 78% full. This figure has been rising by 1 to 2 percentage points per day. More than 400 patients in the Greater Seoul were left waiting for their beds on Thursday. Hospitalized specialized in infectious diseases are also nearing their limits, with more than 3/4 filled in the Greater Seoul area and over 60% full in other regions. Now, as we move forward with the gradual easing of restrictions, it's absolutely imperative that the healthcare sector is capable of handling the growing number of COVID patients and critical cases. Although regions outside the capital still have some headroom, the Greater Seoul area appears to be on the verge of overcapacity.
Right, and in light of that scenario, what has been the response, Yeon-seung, from health authorities?
Well, health authorities are really trying to tackle this issue from all angles. The Ministry of Health and Welfare made an announcement Friday morning on some of the measures they were taking. So first, they've almost doubled the allocation of home treatment in the past 2 months. They're also designating more hospitals specialized in infectious diseases, a move that will add up to 600 more beds. Under the previously issued administrative order, officials are currently working to secure some 1,000 beds. But as I mentioned in my previous reporting, I'm sure you remember, Sunny, even with the extra beds, there needs to be enough medical staff on site to handle the growing number of patients. Here's more from South Korea's health minister.
We are currently in the process of securing 1,312 more medical staff, and we've already found 505 more people who can start working immediately in ICUs.
So authorities are also zeroing in on care centers and nursing homes where many cluster infections have occurred. Care workers at these facilities in the capital region will be required to get tested twice a week, and visitations will not be allowed. Workers and inpatients at nursing homes are also eligible to get their booster shots 4 months after their primary doses, so earlier than most people.
Right. So essentially, Yonseng, authorities are doing all they can, that is, to contain the latest situation, while at the same time allow for a transition to a new normal then.
Yes, exactly. Well, authorities really seem eager, just as anybody else, to really move forward with easing the measures. So there was also a special request from the Blue House Thursday afternoon with President Moon Jae-in urging government officials to stabilize the situation. He asked them to take special care so that everything runs smoothly, from the fast-tracked booster campaign to the securing of extra ICU beds. He asked the nation's people to stay calm and follow the government's prevention guidelines and the recommended dates for vaccinations. He also added that the road back to normal won't be an easy journey, especially judging by the situation in other countries that have taken easing steps ahead of South Korea.
Right. All right, Yonseng, thank you for that, but do stay with us for the extended talks. Right, earlier on this Friday morning, Prime Minister Kim Buk-yeom sat down with the heads of major hospitals in the metropolitan region to better address the repercussions of the rising caseloads on the medical system. I have Seoul back at the desk with details on that. Right, Seoul?
Right, Sunny. So this emergency meeting was held with over 20 chiefs of major hospitals here in the capital region to address the challenges posed by the rising posed by the rising number, of course, of COVID-19 patients who need intensive care. Mentioning a near 30% rise in COVID-19 infections in the nation compared to October, with around 80% of those occurring in the capital region, Prime Minister Kim Buk-yeom noted the surge at nursing hospitals and other senior facilities in particular that have led to the shortage in hospital beds, and also made the life of medical staff even more difficult ever since the transition into the living with COVID-19 scheme. While stressing the government has been doing its utmost to avoid a repeat of our painful experience from the third wave by expanding hospital beds through an administrative order, if the current situation, which he described as critical, again cannot be overcome, we might have to put a stop to our gradual return to normalcy. With that, Kim promised more support for medical staff and equipment, as well as this.
We will carry out efforts to use the medical resources we have in a more efficient way. We will improve our management of hospital beds to make sure that ICU beds are allocated for the treatment of patients in critical condition, followed by a quick transfer to recovery wards once their conditions improve.
And the Prime Minister also mentioned that patients' safety will be put at the forefront regardless of the capital region or non-capital region, with that stressing that ICU beds will be managed at a comprehensive level. Now, also Jeon Hae-chol, the country's safety minister, said earlier in the day that beginning on the 22nd of this month for 4 weeks, there will be a special inspection period, and that will be conducted on a pan-government level.
Right, and speaking about the 22nd of November, that also happens to be the date for the full resumption of in-person classes at schools, right, so?
Right, Sunny. So that's actually part of phase 1 of our return to normalcy, which kicked off at the beginning of the month. But the Education Ministry had postponed that full-fledged return to schools, mostly in the metropolitan region, because of the college entrance exam, or Suneung, which was held on a Thursday or yesterday, and also because of the high number of cases that has been continuing in the capital region. So starting Monday, 97% of elementary, middle, and high schools, as well as kindergartens in Seoul, Gyeonggi-do Province, and Incheon are to open. Schools, however, can go ahead individually with flexible rules depending on the severity of the virus situation, meaning partial online learning might continue at some schools. Education officials plan on thorough monitoring, inspections, and antivirus measures such as additional lunch times, as well as further promoting teenage vaccinations. Meanwhile, in the case a student is fully vaccinated, he or she will be exempt from self-isolation even if a person living together has been infected with COVID-19. A negative PCR test result will do before going to school. There are some concerns, though, following the Suneung exam, and you'll get a picture of that by taking a listen to the following interviews.
It was a difficult year, and now I feel liberated. I'm planning to eat out with my friend later on, and then we'll go to singing room and watch a movie.
We are conducting special antivirus inspections as there are concerns that students who have completed their exams might become complacent and hold many gatherings.
Right, and hopefully these young scholars will make responsible decisions. And talking about responsibility, so I understand a recent survey shows the difficulties faced by working moms amid the pandemic.
Right, Sunny. So that's probably not regarding teenagers, but younger children, because according to a latest study, around 6 out of 10 working moms have said they're feeling difficulties due to child rearing, and also 37% of more time they are spending on domestic chores.
I see. So the burden of work and the burden of the pandemic is quite stressful. Now, Yeon-seung, let's revisit those words that you mentioned by President Moon Jae-in about the situation elsewhere across the world, serving as a tale of caution for Korea as it seeks to adopt a new normal.
Right, so because most European countries started their vaccine campaigns earlier than South Korea, they also got a head start in their easing of restrictions, which began in the summer. But things haven't been easy for them since. Germany on Thursday reported more than 65,000 cases, passing the 60,000 mark for the first time. Germany's top health official warned that the country could be in for a very bad Christmas if they don't tighten the measures to dampen the spread. Greece's healthcare sector has also been so overwhelmed with the surge in cases that they had to call in the doctors from the private sector to help out with the growing number of patients.
Right, and also Greece has decided beginning next week it is going to restrict unvaccinated from some indoor spaces such as restaurants, cinemas, and gyms. So that's one of the latest countries in Europe that has decided to backtrack with these COVID-19 measures. And Germany also decided to limit public places too, and especially stressed more vaccinations to get the country safe through the Christmas season that Yeon-seung mentioned. So let's take a listen to the aspiring future German Chancellor Olaf Scholz on more.
First and foremost, it is important that those who have not yet been vaccinated get their shots. And my appeal is for everyone to make a move now and make the decision for themselves, for their loved ones, and for their relatives. It is good that we are having such an expansion of vaccination services with family physicians and also public services offering mobile services with vaccination opportunities in the newly opened centers.
Right, well, let's hope for the situation in Germany to be better contained in the near future. All right, so thank you. See you on Monday. And Yeon-seung, thank you for your input this week.
Thank you.
Trade Minister Yohan Gu is meeting with U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai here in Seoul on this Friday afternoon. On the agenda are issues related to the supply of semiconductors, U.S. steel tariffs on Korean products, as well as the bilateral FTA, which has been in place for the past decade. Now, this is also the first visit by a top U.S. trade official to Korea in 10 years. Tai's visit comes amid the semiconductor standoff between Washington and Beijing, putting Korean firms in a rather tight spot. Staying with local firms, the future is looking quite bleak for them as prices of raw materials escalate amid global shortages in supplies. Our Kim Sang-min reports.
Global supply chain disruption has been accelerating inflation across the world. South Korean manufacturers are among those who have taken the hit, as many of them rely on imports. The Korea Economic Research Institute asked 100 firms out of the top 500, and they said the cost of raw materials this year increased by some 18% from a year ago. By sector, steel saw the biggest surge, jumping almost 30%. This comes as countries like the US, Russia, and China have been enforcing tariffs on their exports of scrap iron, which was once cheap and readily available. Such price hikes in raw materials could be passed on to consumers, as firms are likely to jack up their prices. 34% of the firms said they are already dealing with the issue by raising their product prices by an average of 14%. Experts say that in order to weather the storm of global supply chain disruption, South Korea, which lacks raw materials, has to diversify import channels as well as joining economic blocs.
There are multiple economic blocks based on resources and themes like those specifically for steel and the environment. We have to find them and join each of them to secure alternative stable sources of supplies that we can rely on in case of emergencies like now.
Amid mounting concerns, the IMF has also warned that inflation could hang around longer in some countries if the disruption to the global supply chain lingers. The agency warned central banks on Thursday to remain vigilant over inflationary pressures, adding that it's working through scenarios on monetary policies and the potential impact on the global economy. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Also in related news, producer prices jumped yet again in October on the back of skyrocketing prices of oil and raw materials. Here's Min Soo-kyun.
South Korea's producer prices hit a record high in October, climbing for a 12th consecutive month. According to the Bank of Korea on Friday, the producer price index stood at 112, up 0.8% from the previous month. The reading is up 8.9% compared to a year earlier. That's the biggest increase in 13 years. High figures in this index suggest that future inflation could be high. This comes on the back of rising costs of raw materials.
The 0.8% on-month hike in producer prices last month was due to rising raw material and global oil prices, particularly the price of Dubai crude, which rebounded in October.
Prices of industrial goods gained 1.8% in October from a month earlier. They've been rising for more than a year. In particular, coal and petroleum products soared 12.6%, while primary metals and chemicals climbed 2.5% and 1.7% respectively. Electricity and gas prices also rose 2.9% on month as crude oil prices have been on the rise. Meanwhile, farm and fishery products fell 4.7% on month, with agricultural, livestock and fishery goods all seeing a price drop. Going forward, the central bank expects producer prices to drop this month as the price of oil and raw materials are slowing down. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a sense of uncertainty has been cast on ties between Washington and Beijing, with US President Joe Biden recently sharing the possibility of a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics in China. Our Kim Yo-sun has more.
President Biden says he's weighing a diplomatic boycott of the upcoming Winter Olympics in Beijing. This means Washington could decide not to send a delegation of government officials to the Chinese capital.
Sir, do you support a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics?
Something we're considering.
His comments come just days after he held a virtual summit with his Chinese counterpart to seek ways to reduce tensions between the two superpowers, which have flared over Taiwan, trade policies, and other issues. However, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Thursday that President Biden's consideration of a diplomatic boycott is not related to his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Rather, she explained the administration is deeply concerned about the human rights abuses in China's Xinjiang region. Human rights advocates have spent months lobbying the White House to call for a full-scale U.S. boycott of the 2022 Games. They hope a Washington-led boycott would send a strong message to China as well as other authoritarian countries about America's commitment to endorse democratic freedom. The U.S. traditionally sends a group of high-profile dignitaries, often led by the sitting vice president or the first lady, to attend Olympic events such as the opening and closing ceremonies. First Lady Jill Biden led the U.S. delegation to the 2020 Tokyo Summer Games. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Korea remains dedicated to boosting green growth with its partners in the northern region. Now, this is according to President Moon Jae-in in a virtual address to participants at a related forum. Our Lee Kyung-eun reports.
Marking 3 decades of diplomatic relations between South Korea and Eurasian countries, South Korean President Moon Jae-in has vowed to further strengthen cooperation for the region's inclusive green growth. Moon delivered a message virtually at the 3rd International Forum for Northern Economic Cooperation.
북방 국가들의 기후 위기 대응과 저탄소 경제 전환을 돕는 그린 뉴딜 ODA를 전폭적으로 지원할 것입니다.
14 countries located at the juncture of Europe and Asia have been key partners of Seoul under Moon's new northern policy that seeks to promote regional collaborations. And amid the global initiative for going carbon neutral, the two sides will have more to offer each other in developing new renewable energy projects. Northern region countries can provide their abundant natural resources, whereas South Korea can offer its advanced technology.
Russia's eastern region is famous for its great resources like wind and coastal tidal energy, and the country is cooperating with South Korea on hydrogen car projects, allowing Hyundai Motors to have a production facility there. There's also a production site in Uzbekistan.
Former U.S. President Bill Clinton stressed that such cooperation is inevitable given the world's inherent nature of interdependence, calling it the only pathway to a positive-sum game.
Where we can work together to confront our shared challenges and seize our shared opportunities, even as we have our disagreements, about building the kind of regional and global partnerships that will make our world more stable, secure, peaceful, and prosperous.
South Korea's leading boiler company, Gyeongdong Navien, and Uzbekistan's Textile Federation share their own experiences of exchanging technologies and localization, presenting a point of reference for others going into the future. 이경은, Arirang News.
Gamers and fans are flocking to the city of Busan here in Korea for a glimpse of the latest in the world of interactive virtual games. Our Kim Bo-kyung was there.
Gaming fans are gathering at the southeastern port city of Busan as Korea's largest game convention, global game exhibition, the G-Star, kicks off at Bexco. Coming back this year as a regular face-to-face event, the 17th edition of G-Star features 672 game companies from 40 countries.
This year, South Korea's three major gaming companies, NCSoft, Netmarble, and Nexon, known collectively as 3N, are not participating. But put your worries aside, as other rising game makers like Kakao Games and Krafton are presenting their own massive hits.
Taking the spotlight at G-Star 2021 is Kakao Games, the main sponsor of the event. It is taking up 100 booths to present a wide range of games, including Odin Valhalla Rising, which contributed heavily to the company's all-time high net profit during the third quarter.
We have turned a total of 100 booths into one whole stage. We are going to showcase 7 games, including Odin, the most popular of this year, and to-be-released games.
Setting the standard for the Battle Royale game, Krafton is attracting gamers with its latest mobile offering, PUBG New State. With more than 10 million downloads on the Google Play Store within just a week of its release, Krafton's booth is just enough to catch G-Star visitors' eyes.
The game's background is the year 2051, so we try to make our booth feel like the distant future. Also, you can actually get to look at in-game items, such as a drone supply kit, while touring around the booth.
Other local and overseas gaming companies, such as Shift Up and Tencent's Aurora Studio, have also joined the event. To make sure everyone safely enjoys G-Star, organizers are imposing strict health measures.
We are only letting people in who have either vaccine passes or negative PCR results within 48 hours. Given that lots of visitors are adolescents who are not vaccinated, we believe such strict measures are necessary.
Visitors who want to see the latest game trends can visit Busan until Sunday. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Busan.
Up next, we have a check on the foreign media coverage of events in this part of the world. I have Kim Sung-hyun here in the studio as always. Sung-hyun, welcome back.
Good to see you, Sunny. So a wide range of stories today. We have more international coverage on Squid Game. Also, fresh investments being made in Korea's entertainment industry. And then on the economic front, a Chinese battery maker is setting up a shop here in the country, while the UAE has signed a multi-billion-dollar deal to buy Korean-made missiles. Also, finally, we do have news out of North Korea, where Kim Jong-un has reappeared in public in over a month's time. So let's dive right in. YouTube star Mr. Beast, whose real name is Jimmy Donaldson, had pledged last month to create a real-life version of Squid Game and has since taken a significant step towards making that promise into a reality. Newsweek noted he has put together his own version of Squid Game, with the project costing him millions of dollars. Fans were given an early preview of the finished work, with Donaldson sharing a video that takes viewers on a tour of the sets he had built. Donaldson says he has recreated every game from Squid Game in real life, adding that the sets cost around $2 million, with a further $1.5 million set aside on prizes. The paper pointed out that the violence depicted in the show has been a source of controversy, but Donaldson's version won't have any lethal consequences for the contestants, whom he's recruiting at the moment.
Right, and these contestants look to win prizes worth $1.5 million.
That's right, $1.5 million.
I see. All right, meanwhile, I hear Korean conglomerate is looking to ride the global wave of Korean content through a rather sizable investment.
Right, exactly, Sunny. With Korean content basically exploding on the global stage, ranging from Squid Game to BTS to the movie Parasite. CJ Group's vice chair Lee Mi-kyung, or Mickey Lee, is now making a big bet on K-culture. So Bloomberg reported that CJ Group's entertainment unit is considering a stake purchase in SM Entertainment, a major K-pop production company and agency, and it plans to spend more than $4 billion on content production over the next 5 years. Like CJ Group, other large Korean firms are making ever larger investments in this sector as well. Bloomberg sees the entertainment sector becoming a growing component of the nation's economy and offering strong stock returns as well. Now, it further noted that platforms such as YouTube and streaming services like Netflix have helped the surge in popularity of Korean content. The value of Korea's cultural exports has already surpassed that of other key sectors, such as agricultural products, also cosmetics, and household appliances.
Right, quite remarkable. And staying with the local economy, Sung-hyun, do tell us about some of the major deals that went down this week that you mentioned earlier.
Yes, so starting with that Chinese battery maker, Sunny, it's named Contemporary Amperex Technology Limited, or CATL. It has set up a branch here in Korea to supply lithium iron phosphate batteries to Hyundai Motors. So Chinese tech media Pan Daily highlighted that this newest regional branch, located in Korea's capital city, Seoul, is the company's fifth outside of China after Japan, Germany, the US, and France. As one of the largest suppliers of electric vehicle batteries in the world, CATL earlier this year secured orders from Hyundai Motor for over half of their future electric vehicle models. CATL is expected to provide stiff competition to local battery suppliers such as LG Energy Solution and SK On as well. Now, in the meantime, in other news, the United Arab Emirates says it plans to purchase Korean-made mid-range surface-to-air missiles in a deal likely to reach $3.5 billion. An official at Korea's Defense Acquisition Program Administration called the UAE's announcement quote-unquote positive, but noted negotiations have yet to be finalized. The system is named Cheongung-2, and it is a core element of Korea's multi-layered air defense network, with the word Cheongung meaning heaven's bow in Korean.
Right. And moving across the border, Sung-hyun, so North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has made a public appearance, you were saying.
That's right. So this week, foreign media were basically buzzing as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made his first public appearance in more than a month, visiting a new planned city being built near the border with China and a mountain that is held sacred by all Koreans. So Reuters indicated the northern alpine town of Samjiyon that Kim visited is being transformed into a massive economic hub called a socialist utopia by officials, featuring new apartments, hotels, and a ski resort. It is in the vicinity of Mount Baekdu, which is the holy mountain where Kim's family claims its roots, with the official KCNA news agency touting it as the epitome of modern civilization. Reuters reported that Kim's latest trip was for the purpose of inspecting the third and last phase of construction, due to be completed by the end of this year, following delays due to international sanctions and the coronavirus pandemic. KCNA did not give an exact date for Kim's visit, but it is the first report of public activity by the leader, Kim, in 35 days.
Right, so like you were saying, more than a month then.
That's
All right,
right.
Song-yeon, thank you very much for that coverage.
Thank you. See you next week.
Stress related to the workplace continues to plague quite a number of workers, and efforts to exit pandemic-related restrictions have some remote workers dreading the return to normality within the office. For more, I have visiting Professor An Jun-sung from Yonsei University. It's a pleasure to see you again, Professor An.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Won Eun-soo from Cha University. It's good to see you again, Professor Won.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Won, we'll start with you then. Let's start with a few words on the presence of stress prompted by interactions with people within the workplace.
Okay, so if we talk about work-related stress, the major contributing factors to work-related stress can be workload, which is too much work, or juggling between work and your private life, or the lack of job insecurity. But last but not least is the interpersonal relationship issues. And also in Korea, we have a unique workplace culture, which is 회식, which is actually an after-hours gathering, which mostly consists of drinking alcohol. And although a majority of people wouldn't mind an occasional gathering amongst co-workers, if these gatherings are too frequent, that itself becomes a major stress factor, as many see that kind of gathering as an extension of work, and some people don't even like to drink. So it's normally as senior staff that instigates such excessive gatherings, and it's very uncomfortable and awkward to say no if you're a junior staff. Partly because you feel guilty because the other co-workers are actually reluctantly going. Also, you can be afraid that your senior or boss might not like you, or you might be isolated from the workplace because you're not participating. And many times when there is a boss that creates a workplace environment where you're not assessed for your working abilities and your diligence, but how well you abide by the personal requests of your seniors, such as joining in for after-hours drink, there is a high possibility that workplace environment has other toxic aspects of it, like poor communication, triangulation, or even favoritism, etc. So I've heard many express how their work environments can be toxic. And the one good thing about this pandemic was they could socially distance themselves from these toxic bosses and co-workers without quitting the job.
Right. And Professor An, in response to this reality that Professor Won has just mentioned, workplace counselling apparently is an option being adopted by local firms especially amid the pandemic. Is there a legal support framework for such adoptions?
Well, as Professor Won has mentioned that there's many issues, and there's the workplace stress is more like generated by the human relations, right? It's a human factor which is needed to fix with the legal or institutional system. So it's like you have to think about how we gonna change our working environment or the culture there, right? And currently there's no actual specific provision on point to dealing with the work-related stresses, but the companies are handling by themselves internally by internal policies. I think that's the time for the Korean government to take a step to modernize Korean labor and employment law in the post COVID-19 era. I think there's time to time to move on.
Time to move on. Professor, staying with that, I hear Germany is therefore seeking a law to give people the legal right then to work from home. Now, tell us a bit more about this effort, and what are your thoughts on the feasibility of such a law being implemented here in Korea?
That's a very interesting question, because I've been asking myself, do we need it, right? Actually, in Germany, I think that's in 2013, they introduced a policy, kind of, many policies about the remote worker, how to deal with it, right to disconnect, basically they call it, and then it means that you can contact employers cannot contact employees off hour, right? After the contracted hours, if you're the contract, employees, right? So that's kind of issue, and also that you have to think about other countries, like European, like Spain, like I think they're transforming into 4 working day from the 5 working day. Actually, personally, I had a student from Spain, and we discussed about issue. And so I was personally surprised to hear that the many the workers in Spain do not like 4 days working schedule, because they got salary reduction.
I see.
So there's always pro and con. Also, we have to think about it, about the right to work remote. Is it about talking about reduction of working hours, or is it reduction of the working salary also? So many things are correlated, economic factors. So when you need to get really carefully approach it, how we're gonna manage it, because that when in the negotiation table, the other side is employer, whether how they take it. That's the really social issue, right? Economic issue as well.
Right. And going back to the idea of having a legal right to work from home, what are your thoughts, Professor An, on such a plan here in Korea, such a law that is?
Well, besides the legality issue, legal issue, I think that it's kind of it's a new global trend. It's becoming new norm as a post-pandemic situation, because then for me personally, I'm teaching in the Zoom, the online lecture for the last 2 years. In the beginning, I thought it was, it's crazy. How can you do online lecture, right? And after 2 years, I found something very positive side of online lectures. It's very interesting. Ironically, I feel much closer to the student.
Would you care to explain that? How do you feel closer to your students?
Because
virtually?
When you do actually offline lecture, you have a physical distance, at least maybe 2 or 3 meters. You don't talk to the same person for 5 minutes, actually, because many people waiting in the line, and very quick Q&A, and then you contact me. I got office hour. Nobody show up, because they're busy. They're studying, they're working. So, but since I'm switched to online, and more people actually come to the office hour, it's easier, convenient. They don't have to come to see. For me, I have to travel like 2 hours back and forth for the 1 hour of business, office hour, and don't have to come to the class or the office hour, spending like commuting only for the office hour 2 hours or something. So, but I think so, and then plus it's much more feel convenient to talk, online. It's very ironic, but I think that I found some bright side of the, but in the future maybe you might have a hybrid, education system somehow,
a blend of offline and online.
I think some universities talking about hybrid model as well.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Won, going back to our topic then, has there been an actual surge then in the number of office workers seeking professional medical assistance, attention for work-induced stress?
Yes, well, we spend the majority of time at work, even more so than at home. So work-related stress can be more damaging than stress we receive from our personal lives. And so yes, a lot of people do seek treatment for insomnia, depression and anxiety, which has been caused by work-related stress. And although a large proportion of the patients who do complain of work-related stress, they complain of working too much, long hours, and also having to do work that requires high emotional involvement, or work or job insecurity as well, and also having to work and take care of the kids at the same time. So those are the components. But also, I have a lot of patients who complain of workplace bullying as well. And in a way, that kind of stress is more detrimental because it's man-made, and it's unnecessary stress, because if the bully chooses not to engage in that kind of behavior, that stress doesn't have to exist. And I've seen victims say that they felt very betrayed by the workplace itself, because it's very difficult systematically to actually put in a complaint towards the bully. And even if the complaint does go into HR, a lot of times it's swept under the rug because workplaces, they tend not to want problematic situations to surface. And also, a lot of times HR needs evidence, like hard evidence, to actually take actions against the bullies. So when the workplace bullying consists of straight out shouting or cursing or even physical abuse, which does really happen even now, maybe it would be easier to get evidence from that because, you know, you can record the situation, etc. But when the bullying is subtle, as for you're being ostracized, or your work is being invalidated, or you have unequal opportunities due to favoritism, or someone's smear campaigning you, all of that is very difficult to prove. So as this kind of stress accumulates, not only can it cause mental health issues, but it can actually affect your physical health, because stress in your immune system is intertwined quite deeply. So I'm sure you've seen co-workers who had been under a lot of pressure become physically ill and leave and had to take sick leave, and which leads to the disruption of work. And also, in the workplace's point of view, that's monetary loss. So work-related stress does not only influence the employees, individual employees, but also the workplace as a whole.
Given that reality, Professor Won, would you say that resignation is a viable option to the problem then? Because you did mention the toxic environment, and it would be only wise for you to try to escape such an environment. And if that included resigning from your job, would that be a solution, do you think?
Right. Well, a lot of people do choose that solution, but in my opinion, the after effects of that kind of work-related stress doesn't just disappear because you quit your job, because you've already been influenced mentally and physically. So you may have lingering symptoms of depression, or you may have developed a sense of self-doubt, or you may have built up mistrust in the workplace system at whole. And some people even say that they've actually lost the urge to continue to work. So if you are in that kind of state, I mean, it's really helpful to find resources that may get you through this difficult time, rather than just, you know, say, okay, I quit, this is the end. Many times it doesn't work that way.
And resources would be reaching out to people like yourself, of course.
Yes, myself, or even non-MD counsellors as well, or even reaching out to family and friends and sharing what they're going through. That's a big help as well.
Right. Professor An, back in 2019, given the concerns raised by Professor Won, Korea introduced legislation to root out harassment within the workplace. How effective has this introduction been?
Well, I mean, from the legal perspective, right, there's only 2 years old, right? So, well, whenever we have new policy, something really big policy takes time, and means that you need to get amendment, revise it. But generally speaking, in terms of the enforceability of any regulation, government regulation, there's always major issues such as the ambiguity and also the applicable scope, right? So in terms of ambiguity, I mean, the Korean version of the Workplace Harassment Act, right? So basically, it's not clear about, there's ambiguous provisions such as how you define it, harassment, right? Can we do more specified? I mean, can you more specified? I think you can specify the provisions, something like that. In the U.S. cases, and they have a specified, I think that's well drafted. The language itself. For example, they included the cases, comma, more specific. And for example, right, the one thing I noticed that from U.S. regulation is about they talk about the religion issue also. So if if the boss is language A, not religion A, and you're religion B, and they not force, but you need to go to some activity, something you don't want to do it because against your religion's belief or something like that. So I think that's things in the U.S. is more problem. More social issue than Korea, but we're developing that issue right now. So I think that we need to amend it, revise it, more closely reflecting the reality of the workplace.
Right. Going back to something that you mentioned earlier, Professor An, there are new labor laws in Portugal as well. They make it illegal for an employer to contact an employee after office hours. What are the chances of such a regulation here in Korea?
I guess it's very slim because the social, corporate culture, right? When you have, it's about enforceability. You can make any law, beautiful law, but if you cannot enforce it, what's the point of the law, right? So I think that most people generally agree on the idea about right to disconnect, the European style. However, in reality in Korea, we consider the very unique corporate culture, right? Getting together, and plus a lot of work is project basis. It's like your team project, so it's you need to work together, and then teamwork is a very big factor in the working project. But I think from my experience, when I work at the law firm, is the way system work is the billable hour system. You individual person work on different projects, but on the billing system. But most of other non-legal field is about the actual. You talk about office hour, working hour, but some professional field, they talking about the billable hour, something very much flexible. So you can come in late, at 11 a.m., but you work late, 3 a.m. You can do anytime you want, as long as you keep the deadline. So I think it's more
flexible.
Yeah, very flexible. I think there's things that we need to work. It's not about only the legal system, it's a more corporate system, culture, work on more independent project basis and let people more flexibility and more efficiency. I say more efficiency, yeah. I think that's the more important, right?
All right. And I was wondering, Professor Won, do you have students reaching out to you after work hours as well? We're talking about employers not being able to reach their employees, should not be reaching their employees after office hours. What about for you as a professor?
Right. Actually, I'm actually a professor as well, but I'm actually in the global marketing department of our hospital as well. And yes, to be honest, we do contact each other after hours. There's situations where it's inevitable. So
right, it is. In the media as well. So
yes.
Right.
Yes.
Professor Won, I'd like to now direct your attention then away from the victim and towards the aggressor, so to speak. What are some of the typical traits of the aggressor?
Okay. So, bullies have common characteristics such as lack of empathy, they're exploitative, they're antagonistic, they have poor boundary issues, they're vindictive, they're easily angered, and they're controlling, and they're entitled. So, people with these tendencies, they tend to not care about the pain they inflict on their victims, and they think they're allowed to do as they please. But they can also be very charming, so very manipulative, so they can easily get away with their bad behaviors. And we describe people with such a cluster of characteristics to be narcissistic. And most narcissistic people have a crave for power, so they're likely in high positions. So you're likely to meet a narcissistic boss than a boss with other characteristics. And often narcissists are exempt from disciplinary actions in the workplace for various reasons. But first of all, they're actually often productive, normally by exploiting other people, because they crave power. And in order to have that power, they make profit for their workplace at any cost. So, and workplaces tend to not want to lose that kind of productivity. So they often look the other way.
It's like looking at a character from a movie.
Yes, but if you look around you, there are many people with these characteristics. I mean, there can be characteristics could be small, and the characteristics can be strong, but there are people with these characteristics very often.
And so how can these victims seek to better protect themselves and psychologically?
Right. Well, actually, I'm going to get to that, but I just have a few other things I want to tell you. And also, I wanted to explain why these perpetrators, these bullies can get away from the situation. And it's also because even, because they're very antagonistic, right? And if they think that the workplace is out to get to them, they will fight, and they will fight with all their might. And when they fight dirty. And in the HR's point of view, it's much difficult to handle a narcissistic bully than to handle the victim. So HR, many times choose the easier way out. So back to the question you just asked me. So a few things you can do for yourself in situations where taking formal actions against the bully is difficult is, first of all, don't personalize the bully's behaviors, because many times the perpetrators gaslight their victims into thinking that it's their fault the bullying is happening. It's because they're inadequate, they're weak, they're incompetent, and the workplace doesn't need them. Any sort of bullying is wrong. And it's actually important to acknowledge that it's actually the unhealthy personality characteristics of the bullies that this problematic situation is taking place. And try to protect yourself by documenting everything possible. Emails and texts related to work, especially if that bully is related to the texts and emails, because there might come a point where you need objective evidence to prove that this was your work and acclaim your work, or also not take the fall for the mistakes of other people. And there is also a high possibility that a bully may outlast you at work, because, as I said, when they fight dirty. But a lot of times people try to withstand such abuse. As you know, you don't want to quit a job that you work so hard for because of a narcissistic bully. But many times they quit at the very last moment in a very emotional and impulsive state because they can't take it anymore, and they tend to walk out with nothing and no preparations. So rather than doing so, especially if you're in a workplace that isn't doing anything for you to get out of that situation, quietly prepare an escape plan. And that could be like another job option. And even if that job pays less, a non-toxic, supportive work environment will do you much good, what money cannot do, and which includes enhancing your well-being, physical and mental well-being.
Right. And Professor, and how can we legally respond to such a scenario, in your opinion?
Actually, Professor, mentioned a very interesting point about, in terms of a legal perspective, right? Is evidence very important. So how you build the evidence is very critical when you say, let's say you have litigation or anything, file a complaint, right? So one of the things about here, for example, right, in Korea, it's illegal to record your conversation, but which is not legal in many countries, right? So a lot of things, you're building up evidence is very important, and you understand at the same time, the evidence can be a double-edged sword. It can bite you back. So you have to be very careful how to select evidence, but you're recording perhaps evidence, but also the harassment, there's have to minimum level of harassment, which is allowed by the law, right? Prohibited by the law, right? So you need to know that is that the level of harassment is sufficient, legally sufficient to be recognized by law. That's the things you have to ask yourself, and then you can ask, HR department, is it really the level? Is adequate level? Is to find out not only subjectively, they have to be objectively, agreed by the group. Even the HR group will say, well, that's the level exceeded. So there are things you need to carefully look at yourself and how things happens, right? So getting collecting evidence and then find out the minimum level. That's very important.
Seeking legal advice as well, then.
Yeah.
All right, Professor, and as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Won, it's been a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends our broadcast for this week. Do join us again next Monday for more coverage from this part of the world. Have a good weekend.